Yes. Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Loïc Lemer, and despite the fact that I'm French, I will speak in English, and I cannot do any German. But I'm honored to host this panel, distinguished panel with a fantastic set of speakers here. And we will talk about a very exciting topic as well, which is both present and future, is social software and virtual worlds. And so, just to begin with, I'd like to introduce you to my panel. So, at my right, you have Philippe Rosdahl, who is the already listening to me in German, I think, and who is known worldwide as the founder of Second Life, which is the best known virtual world. You have your fans here. You have your fans, Philippe. So then we have we are fortunate enough to have first a woman with us, and that's good for a change. And we have Florence Develay, who is a pastor in Switzerland, and who will give us and share our thoughts about church and virtual worlds, church and how to use those new tools, and more of philosophical approach to it. We then have Raphael Capurro, who is a professor of information management and information ethics, and is based in Stuttgart. So I guess we will talk to you in German, better than me. Welcome. Thank you for being here. We have Raphael Capurro, who is a professor of Joseph Weizenbaum, who is a former professor of computer science, still professor, sorry, at the MIT. Thank you for reminding me, and who brings years of experience in the field. And finally, we have Reid Hoffman, who is the founder of the social software LinkedIn, which is the leader of its field in the business social software, and he was also very well known in Silicon Valley for what he does in this area and his expertise. Thank you. We have a hot room tonight. Huh? So let me start by defining what it is. So as we have both aspects of both virtual worlds and social software, I would like to have Philippe, if you would, first, describe what is a virtual world generally, and what was your vision, or what is your vision with what Second Life has become and is continuing to be.
Sure. So to try and explain Second Life and virtual worlds quickly, let me say the Internet and the World Wide Web are a sort of way of using thousands, millions of computers to connect us together. On the World Wide Web, we have servers who have information on them, and we read that information and click on the text to move from one server to another server. In a virtual world, we are using the same computers, the server computers, but instead of words, we actually create reality, a space that looks real, that we can walk around in with digital bodies that are called avatars. All the spaces in the virtual worlds are built, just like web pages, by the people who are using the virtual world. And so it is a place that contains many different people from around the world and many different types of experiences and content in the same way that the Internet does. We're just at the beginning, I think, of these virtual worlds, but that's basically the idea. A big 3D world you can walk around in, meet other people, learn, and do many different things.
But describe your vision. I heard you say that Second Life wasn't a virtual world, but it was a country you were building.
I think many times people think of virtual worlds like Second Life as being computer games, but they are not computer games. Second Life represents the beginning of a new type of software and a new way of using the internet in which, like the World Wide Web, you can do anything you want to do, but you can now do it in 3D. But it is important to note that it is not a game, and when I've said that we were building a country, I meant that we were building a country because the experiences and the economy and the rules, in some cases, of this virtual place are in many ways different and unique in comparison to the real world. Many people from different countries are together in this virtual space. There is no one country. 75% of the people, for example, who use Second Life are not in the United States. It is a very, very global phenomena. And these people coming together are building essentially a new society in cyberspace, in this virtual world.
Thank you. Reid, what is, compared to a virtual world, what is a social software? Can you really start by the very, very basics? In Europe, we tend to describe social with something else than what we usually say about social software, like in America. Like in France, for example, if you say social, it has really, social aspects and definition to it. So what is social software?
So, whereas what Philip described was something that was almost a visual metaphor for life as you see around you. It has avatars, it's just pictures of people, or kind of a form navigating a three-dimensional virtual world through the computer. Social software is other ways that people establish their identity, put their presence online, and interact with people. And there's a wide variety of different options. One that I hope at least most of you have probably heard of is blogging, where people essentially put out a set of usually small bits of content, either in text or in pictures, or in kind of the newest trend is video, like seismic and whatnot. And what happens is this is my expression of myself, and part of what makes it social is it's me establishing my identity, it's me interacting with other people. One variant of that is known as social networking, where you go onto a space like Facebook, which is for social, or LinkedIn, which is for business, and you connect to people you know and interact with them there, either to help you in your social arena. So, for example, a lot of what happens on Facebook is sharing pictures with the people you already know. It also is a good environment for playing social games, like card games or board games like Scrabble, or in the case of LinkedIn, where you help each other, like, for example, answer questions that you have about how you solve professional tasks. And what makes it social is that it's inherently people expressing their identity and presence and connecting and communicating with other people around them. And that's one of the reasons why social software and virtual worlds have a lot of similar aspects to them when you think of them, because that expression of identity, that collection, sharing a space and communicating is fundamental to both.
So is a game a social software?
It can be. You can play a game by yourself, and that's not social. You can play a game like poker on Facebook, and that is social software.
Right. All right, Florence. How do you see this from? Have you started your church in Second Life? How do you see it from your perspective?
No.
Do you think it's a?
No.
You have not quoted any number yet, but like Facebook is more. I was with Mark Zuckerberg, the founder, a few hours ago. It's more like 60 million people, which our friend Yossi Vardi, the founder of ICQ, would say it's not a software, it's a religion. So do you think we are creating new religions? How do you see it from your perspective?
It would be rather sad if we could create a new religion so quickly that it might be a religious phenomenon if one networks and shares joint ideas and enthusiasm, but that, of course, doesn't create a new religion, where there has to be some sort of common experience, history, joint history and experiences. You asked me about my own experience. That's to say whether there are churches in Second Life or on other platforms, and I'm sure you can imagine that as a pastor, I look for churches in cyberspace and in Second Life. In fact, I did find a church, but a few minutes ago I was taught that that was not quite right. I think it was 2 months ago. I thought I'd found a church, but there were sort of sect-like religious groups. Now, I thought that was rather sad and regrettable, because I think that perhaps for the churches it might be a new opportunity where it wouldn't be just a game, but it would be a real experience of religion. Why not? Why shouldn't I, in Second Life, go into a virtual space, a virtual room, and find silence, sit down and light a virtual candle and make a confession? That would be a big step, that you can say things which face-to-face you might hesitate to say. I don't want to write that off and diminish it in any way. I don't think it's any less than any other sort of religious practice that one might be involved in.
But Florence, I created an island, and we'll talk about politics later on Second Life myself last year, and I was dated by a very, very attractive avatar. So an avatar is a person, right, represented in 3D, and she was very, very sexy, really. And so I didn't tell my wife, nothing like it. This was all virtual, by the way. But I then decided I wanted to meet her in real life, just for the experiment. And she was a he.
Of course she was a he, a sexy woman in the internet.
And extremely geeky, right? So, and what does it tell you, as a pastor? Why? No, but you see what I mean? Why do we have...
It tells me the same than it tells to you.
It tells me exactly the same. I think I'd have been very disappointed if I were to meet my virtual person in real life. But I think you've got to count that's on that happening, in fact. I'm being disappointed, but I think you can experience some of your soul ideas. You can exchange them. You have this fantasy of a sexy woman, and you can do something with her that you perhaps can't do with your wife, and that wouldn't harm you. And then it turns out to be a man. It doesn't matter, because you don't have to meet them in real life. I'm absolutely opposed, and I always say this to people who come to me for counsel and advice, and they're all very frustrated when they're on Swiss Flirt or whatever other company, and they think that the first contact they have, that's it. I found my soulmate, and then they meet, and it's terrible. And they do it 50 times, and every time, 50 times, it's just as terrible. I don't see why one can't take the daring step and say to oneself, this is internet and this is real life. Why do we have to mix the two? Why can't you just live your fantasies on internet? Why do you always have to think it's only real once you see the person in life? It's just as real if you're in Second Life or cyberspace. It's one form of reality which is growing stronger and growing more real. And I think that very probably in real life, one is probably more often disappointed than in one's fantasy world. And I think that it's a good thing that we can stimulate our fantasy in this way. Well, your appetite you find outside, and then you come home and you eat.
I'll say it virtual next time. Professor Weizenbaum, how do you feel about the rise of those social software and virtual worlds? With your experience, how do you see these forms of communication arising? Why don't we stick just to other forms of communication like real face-to-face conversation? Florence wants virtual more than real.
Ja, also ich weiß nicht, wie viele.
I don't know how many people here have their own personal experience, such as we've just heard about. But I think that what we've experienced over the last 10 or 20 minutes, however long it has been, is perhaps one of the most important experiences. And what it teaches us is that, well, how can I put it? The tragedy which is at stake here, so to speak. First of all, one of the things which we see here, or which I see very clearly and perceive very clearly, is the devaluation of language. And that is really very sad. There's even the word virtual world. I don't know who can really tell us what virtual truly means. We say we create a world. Well, what's that supposed to mean? It's just a sort of a model, a cliché, if you want. And we're told that we can walk around in this world. We're looking at a screen, but we can walk around in this world, we're told. If one thinks critically, then it's nonsense. The statement which was made, you can do anything you want to do. You can do whatever you want to do in this virtual world. We can't do with a computer what you want to do half the time. You can't even write a letter outside this virtuality before the computer breaks down, etc., etc. I could say a great deal about all this as a computer specialist. I'm only quoting what has already been said here. Somebody else said, we bring people together in a new society. Yeah, we bring people together. What does it mean? As opposed to a discussion where you can actually look your partner in dialogue in the eyes, look them in the face, and you see them. So what does it mean to look at a computer, to say that you're bringing people together? I think once again it's really demeaning the language. I could use stronger terms. Here on this side, the word identity came up. People establish their identity, for example. Is that how you create your identity? Well, I'm very happy. I'm sorry, I've forgotten Florence's name, but the pastor. I'm happy that she did speak about reality, particularly that she mentioned that people have a history, individuals have a history. Today in computer sciences, I have to say that half of my life was spent in some of the top universities of the world, certainly the top universities in the United States. The MIT, for example, and at Stanford as well, and Carnegie, and in many other of these top universities. And people work very, very hard. A great deal of money is invested, and a lot of the money is used for the creation of robots who are rather similar to man. And then people say that man is a machine. That's one thing. And then secondly, I can remember a researcher who said in 50 years we won't have robots which are similar to humans, but they will be identical with humans. And then people will be able to marry these robots. Well, if I see a wonderful, a beautiful woman, one thing which she doesn't have, she may have a beautiful body and whatever, but one thing she won't have is that she will never have been a child, so she's got no history. And it's It's this history which creates us, which makes us real humans. All that's thrown out in this virtual world. I establish my identity once again. I think it's a very dangerous development. And I think it was 50 years ago that I wrote somewhere that the task, the beginning of the year 2000, the most important task, the most important job for us will be to maintain and to protect the human image, the image of what a human is. And everything we've been talking about is threatening this image which we have of mankind and what mankind is.
I wonder if, sorry to interrupt you, Professor, but...
And then, of course, there's the question, do we need this?
You're saying you don't need it. So...
That's all you understood?
Well, who is... let's do a quick... a quick poll in the room. So, who thinks that we are making, progress with social software in real worlds? Okay, that's barely half of the room.
Naja.
Who thinks we're that it's mostly dangerous and tends to agree with what I only see, and that it's not a progress? All right. Well, we have. A very interesting room tonight. I have to say personally I'm used to rooms which are totally, in favor of it. So that's very interesting. Let's have a conversation. So, Professor, which camp are you on? What is your vote? Do you think it's more of a danger or an opportunity?
I don't like these either-or questions because they're traps, and this black-white thinking is not good. Reality is a blend of things. And Second Life is part of reality. What else? It's not something we've made up. It's software and it works. So the difference or distinction between virtuality and reality is part of our technical world today. And we should make the best of it. However, I do agree with Professor Weizenbaum. We just participated in a very interesting discussion on the environment, ecology, and climate, global warming in the real world. Of course, we could also discuss this in the Second Life or the virtual world, but we should establish the connection between the two. What I would think would be fatal, even though this may be a bit too exaggerated, is to create an illusion or the illusion that there's a pseudo-artificial world that is isolated, a vacuum, to create artificial paradises. Well, that's something human beings have always created. That's not new. But they do help us don't help us very much in this very difficult situation. You just forget about the real world, you go to the virtual world, play around a little bit, and forget all your worries. But that's not very good because it doesn't help in improving interpersonal relationships. Obviously, we need some fun. That's fine. I also go to the theatre. Second Life is also theatre, or theatre is Second Life. There's no question about that. So we have to weigh all of this very carefully. I was very surprised to read in the Süddeutschen Zeitung this morning the virtual world, real world, and it says that internet goes, and Second Life has hardly been regulated, whereas the banks can not survive without any regulation. There's some quarrel going on between banks about real life and, I think, Second Life about regulation. If banks are created in Second Life and the euro then has a different value than in real life, then you really have to wonder. And the interest rate was 40%, and this bank that was created in Second Life then simply collapsed. But let's bring it down to real life.
2 days ago, made disappear 5 billion.
5 billion,
right?
It's fine.
So I think in real life we have some problems with banks as well. But we should maybe let Philip answer all these,
May I just say one more thing? It's a question of proportion. 6 billion people on the planet and only a few thousands on Second Life. Let's not forget the proportions.
It's more like hundreds of millions, right?
Yeah,
if you add MySpace to Facebook.
Ja gut, aber dann reden wir über das Internet.
Yes, but then we're talking about the internet. We have to know exactly what we're talking about here. We have to define that.
And social software.
Okay.
And if you add MySpace and Facebook and Skyblog in France, and I guess in Switzerland you have others, then we're talking about a massive hundreds of millions of people.
Dann reden wir über was ganz anderes.
But then we're talking about something quite different. Then we're talking about people who all own this kind of a device. They're all connected via the internet. They're billions. That's part of the real world. Then I don't understand what we're talking about here. What's the topic? This is part of the real world, these little machines. So we separate existence into real life and Second Life, and for me that is not true.
In fact, one thing I would agree with is that the creation of a fantasy existence, that kind of experience that is apart from the real world, is only one thing that a person can do with virtual worlds. And in fact, increasingly nowadays, it is not perhaps even the most common thing people do. If you believe that knowing and being able to communicate with people from countries and languages which are not your own, if you believe that that is a bad thing that hurts us, then you should not use virtual worlds. But if instead you believe, as I do, that connecting people together from countries and across languages and cultures that they would normally never experience is a good thing, if you would like your next 10 friends to be friends who are from countries that you may well never visit, which is what can happen in a virtual world, I believe that type of experience is an experience that is very much a force for good in the world. And that in fact, as the world today, we are in great danger of not connecting ourselves together. And those connections, that communication across languages and cultures, I believe is likely to be one of the only forces that will keep us all safe and allow us to prosper and continue the human adventure that we've begun together. And that virtual worlds represent a very powerful tool for doing that. In fact, as they are being used today by millions of people, I think they are the first and only example of our using technology to bring ourselves together. That's one example. The second one I would give you is a more specific one. Autism is a disease where you are frequently unable to communicate with other people because it's difficult to understand what their faces are saying. You can listen when you're autistic, but it's very hard to understand people's gestures and their body language. There is an island in Second Life which is only for helping, and this is only one small place within Second Life, it's very large. There's an island which is for helping people with autism practice interacting with each other. So first they interact with text by typing, and then they interact with their voices by talking, and then they wander around in public places in the virtual world and meet other people and practice at not being afraid, at communicating. This is something that has been studied, not by us, it's been studied by scientists, and it's something that in the early results we have seen has shown an ability to help people with autism talk to each other in the real world. So the virtual world in that case is actually helping the real world. The telephone and the telegraph were both considered, when they were brought into the world, as being dangerous machines that would make us isolated from each other and stop us from communicating. This has happened every time there have been technologies like this, and I think that it will happen some now, and then we will learn and move on.
Philip, thank you. Professor Weizenbaum, you think telephone was a threat to humanity as well?
Well, my God. First of all, where in the world, wo in dieser Welt?
Where in the world does the evidence come from that the telephone was condemned as a dangerous threat and a dangerous machine? And people wondered whether it was useful or going to be useful, but I don't know of any evidence. But what we're hearing from this side of the panel again and again, that words are being used like communication. Communication is important. Of course communication is important. But the best form of communication is still face-to-face communication. Obviously, we cannot talk with everyone face-to-face. That's not possible. Just a minute, let me go on. But to call what is being said here communication is what I call abuse or degradation and alienation of language. Communication is so terribly important that the first and prime importance and priority of school and education is to teach language, first of all, so that people can express themselves properly and make themselves understood. That's the purpose of communication, the first purpose of communication. And if you consider exchange, whether it is text or other, on the internet, if you look at the chat rooms and so on and so forth, and you look at how language is being used there and how it's being destroyed and corrupted, and to call that communication, no, I don't agree with that. I don't think that this kind of communication, and then of imagination is another word that is being used, of fantasy. I've observed this in the last 50 years, especially in IT. Promises are made again and again of what will be possible in the future. The computer will be making this possible, artificial intelligence, and this and that and the other. Just a minute, let me finish.
Ja, aber trotzdem.
Yes, but still. Then look at genetic engineering. Everything will be cured, neurology. And all we are hearing here are promises. We're not talking about reality. We're not even talking about virtual reality. We're talking about fantasy, imagination. Well, I'll leave it at that for the time being. Thank you.
Well, you seem to have fans in the room, at least. Now I don't even dare to speak, because I feel like I don't use proper language myself, which is true because it's not my native English. But let's get to...
That has nothing to do with it.
All right. Let's get to concrete examples of, and no fiction, of how social software can help in real life, only in real life. Talking about business, if you allow us, because this is very concrete. This is how people get jobs, make a living, and create even companies inside those walls. So I'd like Reid and Philippe again, and then we'll have comments from other panelists on how, very, very concretely, you see business, you see you see people finding jobs in LinkedIn.
So, hopefully, as a native English speaker, I actually know what the word communication means, but I might have some doubts about that. What you do with social software, LinkedIn being an example on the professional side, is you use it to find and reach out and talk to other people. Now, frequently, that can lead to a meeting in real life. So a concrete, for example, is a friend of mine, a person I knew when I was working with him at Apple, was working in Seattle. I hadn't spoken to him in 10 years, but he was connected to me on LinkedIn. and he was interested in working on a job in Yahoo and noticed that the person who was hiring was also connected to me. So he sent me a note saying, hey, could you tell this person, about our working experience and, help me, get an interview for this job. And I went, oh yeah, I remember, even though it's been a while, I remember he was, diligent and easy to work with and dedicated to getting stuff done. And usually for references for work, this sort of thing is very important. So I forwarded that message on with a reference saying I would highly recommend that you talk to him, and if you have any other questions, you can talk to me. And he got the job. And that's the kind of applications that people use this for. Similarly, for example, on social software and on the professional side, you go on a vacation, you take a variety of pictures, you want to share them with a group of your friends and family, you upload them, and then it's very easy for people to see it and browse it. There's a concept called tagging, which means you can put some terms like, oh, this is a picture of Reed, or this is a picture of my wife, Michelle, and you can kind of sort through those, and those enable a very quick sharing of, actually, because one of the things that's nice about pictures is an emotional experience, which then enhances the communications that you have either by writing or by telephone or the next time you meet people in terms of a shared context and shared experience.
Ja, ich lebe in Berlin.
I live in Berlin. 3 of my children are in the United States. Of course, we write to one another, emails and so on, but we also take a pen with ink and we write by hand. It takes a little longer, but it's lovely. It's lovely. It's wonderful to get letters. When I get a letter from my children or they get a letter from my children, it takes me 2 hours to write a letter by hand, but in those 2 hours, I'm with them, I'm thinking of them, and they feel that. If I write an email, I write something, then I think, no, that's not right, I can delete it. But if I write a letter, I write it, and if I don't agree, I still leave it, I just trace it, I put a line through it, then it can still be read. So the children follow my trains of thought. What you have just said, that's right, that's true. For 2,000 years or longer, we've had the post. It's taking faster and faster, of course, but we still have had the post. We can also send photographs on paper in an envelope. I'm on the internet every single day. I've got laptops in the plural. All my professional life I've worked with computers. I'm not an enemy of computers. Don't believe that. But what I'm talking about is reason, common sense. The comparisons which have just been made, someone calls me, I knew him 10 years ago, and so on and so forth. Of course, there's telephones. I can also write to the person who I know at Yahoo. But that is not an absolutely essential need. We can do without the computer for that kind of thing. That is not an example. It's not a concrete example of what we are talking about.
There's one essential need is to generally make a living to survive. So I was just trying to get the business aspect, if you allow us to discuss it.
Aber das, was gesagt hat.
Yes, but what was said by my neighbor on the left has absolutely nothing to do with that, with earning your living. Let's have some concrete, specific examples.
Living?
Nein, was ich sagen.
No, what I'm saying is, or trying to say, is that computers, email, has helped to establish a link, but the computer isn't the essential element in establishing the link. This is not a concrete example of the application and use of social software. Well, that is what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that it's not important to get a job. Of course it's important to get a job. Professor Weizenbaum, there's something that irritates me a little bit. You say that you can also recommend someone via the phone, in a telephone conversation or send a letter. We spoke earlier on that in the past there wasn't a telephone and you used messengers. And then when the telephone was invented, everyone said, we don't need the telephone, we have messengers. But that's the past. So why should there be such an opposition between all these different possibilities? We have all these different polities today. I love getting letters. When I receive a handwritten letter, then it's usually of much more value for me than an email. But these are different means of communication, and one is not better than the other. When we have business discussions, then I can write it by email, send it by email because I want to have immediate reaction. One does not replace the other. It's just an additional component, additional element. And we can use all these different components to communicate with in different ways with one another. The world is becoming more complex, and because it's becoming more complex, we need different tools to respond to these different situations. One thing I really don't want to let pass, I simply cannot accept it when one maintains that face-to-face communication is genuine. Most people feel that face-to-face communication is of more value, of more worth, because we can see how we react. But just imagine, just take a moment to think of how much we lie. If you were to say to even your dearest friend exactly what you are thinking, just imagine the result, the effect.
Sorry.
Ich möchte es nicht in Ihren Mund stecken. Ich möchte es nur ein bisschen problematisieren.
I'm just trying to exacerbate the way in which the problem is in what terms the problem is put.
We will give you again the opportunity to react. But Professor Capurro, can you?
Ja, also
I agree with you absolutely that the various media shouldn't be played off the one against the other. That's fatal to do that. However, what we have to do is to analyze in our daily lives is how we change in relation to space, time, etc. in our daily lives, because these media remove us from each other. They create greater distance. They seem to bring us nearer, but in fact they often neutralize both distance and nearness. And it's not anything to do with philosophy. It's a philological, a linguistic thing. If we deal with time and space in our daily lives, and we ourselves, we change things. The machines which we create determine us somehow to a certain extent. We seem to become products in different cultures. The situation is a bit different. In Asia, the relationship to time and space is different from that in the United States, in Italy, or here in Switzerland. And what we need are analytical studies which show how we change from the linguistic, philological manner. How do we change in social terms as a result of these media in our time-space relationship, so to speak? I'm using the term communication now, of course, here in a very broad sense. I'm not saying that there's true communication and not and false communication, but there are new qualitative forms of communication which are created. We have to analyze them and try to establish where the limits are and what the opportunity, the potential is. And we have to look at this in relation to our life, participation, and the possibilities which are opened up to us as a result of the existence of these media. I think that for each of us it's rather different because we all have our own individual histories. If you use an instrument such as this, a machine, it's the same machine that I have, let's say, but it's different because your life is different, you behave differently, you've got a different profession. I teach at the university and I deal with my students very differently from you, probably with your parishioners, and I have contacts with my students and I use the net sometimes as well. That's quite clear, but there's a different quality. And here I agree with Mr. Weitzman. If I organize a seminar and I meet my students and then afterwards they send me in their work and I look at their website and etc., etc. But this does change it changes the nature of what we call university, and that is exactly what I think we should think about. Why don't we create a Second Life University? Yeah, there is one. We also, I think, have two. The issue becomes very interesting when we look at the cultural repercussions, so to speak, and when we look at it in real depth. If we have a detailed description, depending on the different cultures and how we as individuals, as plastic, physical individuals, how we change. Developments are going too rapid, and we don't have the necessary analysis. We don't even have a proper analysis of our mobile phones, our cell phones.
Why we are discussing if it should grow or not, because it's just growing. It's exploding, whether you want it or not. It's just happening. And so what I wanted to focus on a little bit, if you allow me, is on the opportunities side. And so Reid tried to explain how people find jobs, create value. I think, Philippe, you have 50,000 people that make a living out of Second Life, so these are real jobs.
50,000 people or so that make money, make more money than they spend in the virtual world. Some of them are this is all they do. It is their real life income. Today, Second Life is still small, although, as you said, it is growing very rapidly. If I may ask, in here, how many people have actually used Second Life? How many? Okay, so maybe 20. So a few. This is true. This is still a very early kind of thing. Most people have not used it yet. It's still very difficult, like the early days of the Internet. If you remember when you first used the Internet, it was hard. Second Life, virtual worlds are difficult. LinkedIn is much easier. It's much farther along now. It's higher quality as an experience. Virtual worlds require a lot of technology, and so they still are difficult to learn and get used to. But once you get used to them, there are things that they can do for you that are quite unique. I think some of what we're talking about here is a debate, an argument about whether the virtual world should replace the real world, and it should not. It should extend it. I would never have as the creator of Second Life, I would never have a conversation with my next door neighbor in Second Life if I could walk up to the person. But of course, I have conversations with people that are sitting in Japan now in Second Life, where I'm actually automatically translating my words as I type them. There is a way of doing this in Second Life, and that is something very powerful. I can do business with or make friends that are Japanese and speak Japanese, and that's something that I can't do in real life. And so I use this new tool to do something that I can't do. Similarly, you can go, as you were mentioning, there are hundreds of universities now, hundreds, that teach classes in Second Life, in the virtual world. And the reason for doing that is because it allows people to come to those classes that live too far away, that wouldn't be able to actually sit and listen to a discussion like this and ask questions. Most of you haven't seen Second Life, but what we are doing on the stage today happens every day in Second Life many, many times. There are meetings like this, town hall meetings, political conversations, university classes, where we all sit together as digital avatars and answer questions and talk in a room like this with about this many people. Those types of meetings happen all the time in Second Life. They don't replace a meeting like this. This is better. But of course, those meetings can have people attending them that are from, 8,000 miles away, which we cannot do here. So these are new capabilities that virtual worlds bring us that I think we're going to use, as we have used all other new tools. But I don't think they need to replace what we can do at a moment like this in the real world.
Let's have a look, if you want, now at the differences between that generation. I don't want to say young or not on purpose, but there is a generation of people. I know there are some friends that I can't call because they don't answer the phone. If you call my voicemail, you'll have send me an email. because I don't want to listen to any voicemail. And I don't think this is very extreme. There is much more than that. But there is a new generation which is different, which doesn't watch TV much, or less and less. I know many people that don't watch TV at all. Whether it's a progress or not, we'll talk about it. And get their news from the social software, most of it. Benazir Bhutto's assassination, I know many people who learned about it from social software, because people start talking. Remember, it's a conversation, so people start talking about it. And that's how you learn. You don't have to go and read a newspaper. I see already on my left that we're moving around. So that's good. And so, but let's have a look. Let's see why do you think, Florence, that this generation, on a more like on a philosophical approach, is growing? Because it's growing, whether you want it or not, it's growing, right? Why do you think these people behave differently, learn differently? They want to be global, for example. Like at the World Economic Forum, we have so many countries here. They feel like the countries maybe matter less. Why do you think it's the case?
Also, ich habe ein bisschen Mühe mit dem Wort.
Well, I find it a bit difficult if we have the word generation. It seems that if we were at the area, the point where we have nothing to do with this. I have a great deal to do with young people, and had contacts with children between 12 and 16, and there are only 20% of them who were involved in Second Life. It's not as if everybody was in cyberspace and involved in Second Life. No, well, that's obvious. That was clear to me. But if we say generation, it's nothing to do with the age. You find 80-year-olds who are 100 times better than I am on internet. They've grasped everything better and more quickly. And so it's not a question of generation, really. All I can do is repeat that what I said before, that exponentially there are more and more people who are becoming familiar with the new media, who are becoming involved with them, and we need new forms of communication and media. How can we say the world becomes global and then at the same time we're stuck in our own little parish, so to speak, our own region? There are environmental problems which affect us all. How can I sit here and have discussions with a few people or a few scientists and discuss problems if I've never met the people who are actually concerned? If it's a question of funding, or if I don't know people, how can I get into a plane and go and talk to people?
And you can't do this. There are a number of companies, including mine. I have, for example, an employee in Texas and one in Philadelphia and one in Singapore. I've never met them, ever. And it's great. It's working fantastic.
Dann habe ich mich schlecht ausgedrückt.
Yes, but that's what I mean. In real life, without our being able to network, it wouldn't be possible. But because we have these new methods and means of communication, it becomes possible. There are people who only know each other over internet. There are some people I have got to know that way, and I like them, and others I don't like so much. Let me try and focus more clearly. I think that the more complex the world becomes, the more global it becomes, the more we need global means of communication which don't replace the local ones, but they supplement and complement them. We have to know where the limits of the various media are, of course.
Professor first and then Professor.
Ein Mehrwert, was ich jetzt sehe, was Sie gesagt haben.
Well, an added value that I can see, and you mentioned this, and that is to say that the society which we have today, if we had it in Second Life, and everybody who's sitting here were sitting in different countries in Second Life, and then they were connected, and then they could ask questions, then of course that is an added value as compared with what we had on internet. I recognize that. That really is something, a plus. We might have a Centre for Information Ethics, and there are 300 people worldwide who've been involved in that over 10 years. I communicate with these 300 people. There's a mailing list, there's a blog. Some of them I don't know. Sometimes we meet each other face-to-face at conferences, but what we don't have is the possibility, which I've just mentioned, that's to say that 300 of us can sit together in a virtual room. We have a platform, and then we can have a discussion. Of course, every 2 years we meet on a very pleasant Greek island. I can only recommend that to all of you. It's fantastic. But it's not quite the same as a Second Life meeting. But the one doesn't exclude the other possibility. And as regards the plus, the added value, where is it? I think that one of them is this, because that is a possibility which we didn't have with blogs or with the mailing list, Skype or anything. Skype's also very good for telephoning, but you can't talk together with 300 people on Skype at the same time. So there is a plus and added value.
Same time on the phone either.
Ja, genau. Ja, gut.
Yeah, that's right. But you can do it by writing. You can have a forum. I have a forum in Mexico, which I chair. There's a real seminar. And for 2 weeks now, we've been organizing a virtual seminar with people that we got to know 10 years ago. People send their texts and everybody answers, etc. But that's something which belongs to the past in a way. What we don't have is what you mentioned. Now, of course, whether I have the time or not, because I had to come here, and whether then I could organize a seminar with Mexicans in Spanish, that's another matter. I don't know whether that's within my possibilities, but I really do recognize the plus and the added value here. The problem at the present time, as you said, is that the technology is still too primitive, too complex, too difficult. You need too much technology. I mean, what about Africa in 10 years? We can talk about it again.
Yes. And Nicolas Negroponte has fortunately launched an initiative to try to equip them with low-cost computers.
$100.
Yeah, which is great. So we'll help a little bit Africa. So in 5 minutes, I will open the floor, so you get prepared for questions, which I hope you have. And I feel kind of bad we are in this conflict, right? There is no conflict, it's just growing. And I also enjoy to write. However, I don't do it very often, but I enjoy it. Professor Weizenborn, I don't know, what your reaction is, but as you're a little negative, just a little.
No.
I was just wondering if you could...
No, I'm not a little bit negative. I'm very negative.
Question, if I would be very, very honored if you could give us, a preview of solutions you can see, rather than just pointing the problems.
Well, we've created a complex world which we have no control over anymore. I don't know whether everyone knows this. As an example, the computer softwares that actually do all the work, real work in the world, I'm not talking about games, are obscure. No one understands them anymore. No one can understand them, because we have lost the information about their creation, the history of their creation, and that is a great danger for mankind. That's one thing. There are 2 words in English which are very important because they make a very clear distinction.
Also hören and listening.
So it's hearing and listening. In German, you could say hören and zuhören, listening and hearing. The distinction in German is not as clear as in English. And all these people are now sitting here, and nonsense is being spouted, dangerous nonsense is being spouted. You've already said twice, hey, I'm talking to you. Listen. You've already said twice, it's happening, and it'll continue. As if technology and progress and technological progress had become autonomous, as if it wasn't created by human beings. And people are doing it for all sorts of different intentions. So the audience is just sitting here, and no one is afraid or is reacting because this is being said. Things are just happening.
Second, that's what she said.
Glad to hear you're happy. Then You also mentioned all sorts of universities and virtual worlds and universities in connection with these worlds. Let me tell you the following story. At one of these top universities, there are 30 presidents of universities here in Davos. Let's just take MIT, my university, top university in the world. A third of the students who have been chosen very carefully at MIT, whose mother tongue is English, are unable to write a page in English without making crass mistakes. They've completely lost their language. And the same is true in all the other universities, whether they're in England or in Germany. Everyone complains about the same thing. Now, it is absolutely essential. It has to be done at MIT, for example, to have computer systems that check all the papers that are handed in by the students, regardless of who these students are, where they come from, and whether they're sending in papers that they've just copied or downloaded from the internet. And when I say this to my counterparts in Germany or in England or elsewhere, they tell me, yes, we have the same problem. We also have to check and spell check. That's also the influence of technology. Thirdly, Google. Please do not misunderstand me. I'm not saying that Google should be abolished.
Check the professors themselves as well, right?
Ja, aber Professors, also wie viele Professors?
Yes, but how many professors actually read the papers that the students hand in? That's the other question. I'm talking about I'm not condemning Google. I use Google. I'm on the internet every single day, and I learn a lot from the internet. But you know how to put the right question, or the question properly.
Yeah.
What should we do?
Just a minute. If you always interrupt me, then I'll just stop.
Also, ich gehe zurück.
Let me go back to Google for just a minute. If you put in my name, you'll probably have 400,000 hits within 3 seconds. If the teacher at a grammar school tells his pupils that they should write an essay about the abolition of waste, what will they do? They'll just Google the words and they'll get 800,000 hits. And what will they do with all these pages? They'll take the first 2 or 3 hits and simply copy and paste, and take this as God's word. And there's no quality control. They just copy it without even thinking. What I'm trying to say is that all we're hearing here are promises. We are not talking about facts as facts. We'll create this, we'll create that. And in any case, one can't do anything about it because technology has become independent and is just self-perpetuating. And what about solutions then? The first solution.
Solution.
Well, a solution. Tell you about the solution 1 minute. What a joke.
See the reaction of Floor, and you can continue if...
Okay, I have no solution. The only solution I have is that we have to learn how to think critically. We have to read critically. We have to learn how to read critically. I'm talking about the here and now. I'm talking about what is being said here. You should listen, not just hear. You should listen actively, and then judge, assess critically what has been said, what is being said. And then, of course, and it's easy to say, more difficult to do, since I only have 1 minute to give you a solution, we must acknowledge that mankind is a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and we should not exploit one another the way we are doing it. But what should I say in 1 minute? We should take Gandhi seriously. We should take the Sermon of the Mount seriously. And if that helps, wonderful, but who's listening? Or who hears it? I say this in my own community, and then the dean of the university says to me and lays an arm around my shoulder and said, "Oh, Joe, wonderful what you've said. Great, it had to be said." And that's exactly the same experience as the lady Parsons, who does a wonderful sermon. Then after the sermon, the members of the community of the parish will shake a hand and say, "Thank you, that was beautiful." And then comes Monday morning and all vanished.
Ich glaube, ich soll noch eins sagen.
Well, let me say one more thing. And this, I think, is really important. And it's not something that we don't know. It's not something that has really put us in the hot water that we find ourselves in. We know all of this. It's not ignorance. And then there's another very far-reaching truth, and maybe this is connected with the solution or solutions. I think we have enough knowledge today. We know well enough today that if we were more sensible, more reasonable, we could create paradise on earth with the knowledge that we possess today.
Who can disagree with this?
Everybody can.
Question. Yes, you are first. So we have mics for you. Can you just, here. Can you just introduce yourself, please, and ask your question?
Können Sie mich hören?
Can you hear me? Stefan Radner, I'm a student from Austria, and I'd like to put a question to Professor Capurro. You spoke about the tremendous influence, cultural influence of the new media, and that they should not be underestimated. So I wonder whether these new media and this virtual world is so much going to change, or has this not already started centuries ago when Gutenberg invented the printing press? When people had access to ideas regardless of who had expressed the idea? Don't you think that the virtual world began then? That this is simply the continuation of a process, an evolution that has been going on for 500 years, just with different means?
Well, of course, the discovery of writing, that isn't the first cultural achievement in human history, but it's very important. The discussion about media, when we compare the written word with oral, you can find things about that in Plato. And Plato defended the oral presentation and damned the written word, although he wrote a great deal himself. 2,000 years later, or perhaps 1,500 years later, when printing was developed, there was the Reformation. All this was a result of the cultural development, so that everybody could then read the Bible, him or herself, and take their own decisions, and that was a major cultural development. And then the third cultural revolution is the one which we're discussing now, the discovery and the development of the computer and the digital network. And that's very clear. Of course, I've oversimplified everything here, but the ethical questions relating to information are quite different. If you look at the Greek world, or a situation where people exchange orally, parousia, as the Greeks called it, the freedom to speak and exchange with each other. And there will be 300 or 400 people meeting together here. We can perhaps see this in Second Life now. We could do that. The parousia, the freedom to speak in the polis, is one of the very bases of Greek democracy, has a different significance from the freedom to speak in an intercultural meeting in Second Life. There are certain dissonances here which have to be taken into consideration, and the rules and regulations according to which such discussions should be held, because there are always certain rules, be they implicit or explicit. They have to be discussed. And then Second Life will have to tackle this issue as well. And so there are certain ethical issues as regards information, and that's the very core of the discussion which we're having today. And I absolutely agree with you that that is one of the important points. There are similarities, but there are also differences. My name is Susanna Müller-Santum.
Philip, it seems to be very easy to connect on your platforms, and people seem to really like it, and they're proud of it. And then, on the other hand, when I go shopping, I find it very hard to connect to the neighbor I see buying cheese, and I perhaps avoid going there and saying hello. And the same in the elevator, I feel like I probably better be alone, and what should I say to this person with me in the elevator? And my question to you is, I'd really would like to know why it's so difficult for us to connect when we're really face-to-face, and why it's so much easier connecting on your network, and if there is a different value attached to these different types of connection.
That is a great question, and I'm not a scientist in cognitive science, psychology, and some of the very difficult questions around why that's true, but it is true. Especially in Second Life, people find it easier to talk to each other for the first time, and then usually more honestly once they know each other. This is something that's being studied. Probably one reason I would suggest is that in virtual worlds you can feel like you're very close to someone, and you can speak with your own voice and with typing, but you don't make eye contact with them. You don't look directly into their eyes. Looking directly into someone's eyes is, of course, a very powerful way to communicate when we have the opportunity to use it. But it is also intimidating, and in many cases causes people to avoid contact. And so, again, like we've been saying, I think that we certainly don't want to lose the ways that we can communicate with the fullest powers that we as humans have. But we also can take advantage of these new systems like virtual worlds and Second Life to allow us to communicate a bit more easily sometimes things that we might be uncomfortable saying. So people are definitely studying that because it is obvious and has been seen in many of these types of systems.
I want to say something. I think, and I'll answer your question very, very briefly, one sentence perhaps. In English, because you asked the question in English. It's your dilemma is very simple. When you're next to someone and you speak to them, there you are. Your contact with that person means that you assume a certain amount of responsibility. And Second World allows you to do all these things without assuming responsibility, and that's a terrible lesson to teach to children.
So let me answer that slightly differently, which is the risks of the encounters are different. So, for example, say someone responds belligerently to you, or say you find yourself in a very embarrassing circumstance. In the physical world, it's a little harder to disengage from that, right? You have to actually physically move away. In the electronic, it's easier. So the level of risk in engaging in the communication is actually less. And actually, that's the way I would interpret it as opposed to the professor's interpretation of responsibility.
Can you stand up, please? Yes, so that we can find you for the mic.
Thank you. My question to Philip Rosell, just want to see that where you see the ultimate vision for the Second Life. Will it grow like a real life? Because real life we have some good thing, bad thing. And Second Life is now only actually focusing on the good thing about it. But where it will go and where it will stop? Thank you.
Well, certainly virtual worlds do not save us from the challenges and conflict and problems that we have with each other. Of course not. There is much conflict in Second Life. People fight there all the time. I actually think that's wonderful. They debate, they fight, they even, pretend to burn each other's houses down. But the intellectual impact of these engagements, of course, can be very strong. People take things, as they should, very seriously there. But of course, we are unable to actually harm or even kill each other in the virtual world. And I think that is a wonderful thing, that we are all safe there. Women in the virtual world are not weaker than men. It is not possible to use your body and be stronger. And so women, by the way, in Second Life, there are about 43% of the people using Second Life are women. And women spend about 40% more time online in Second Life. Also, and this may surprise you, the older you are in the real world, the more you use Second Life. The average person using it is about 32 years old, but someone who is, say, 60 years old and uses it about 40% more, again, than someone who's 30 years old. So I think where this is all going is just an extension of the world that has a very balanced representation inside it, and many more things happening. At the beginning, Second Life was more playful and artistic. People came there to explore and see what they could do. And now we're starting to see education and business meetings and things like this showing up. And so I think in the end, it will contain every type of human behavior that we can create through the computers. Not eye contact, perhaps not smell, at least for a long time, but most everything else that can be...
Maybe we'd rather not have smell yet, I don't know. Did you have a comment?
Ja, nur Philipp, das Problem ist, ob...
The problem is whether the rules in the real world, political, legal, and so on, can be applied in the same way in the second world, and to what extent, because the laws are territorial. They apply in Switzerland or in Germany, and we've already had this problem on the internet. So the question is, how will this continue? Without reflection, without ethical considerations about Second Life, you will not be able to implement all of this. Either is going to be a space which is without any laws and rules, and that'll be a disaster. It just doesn't work. You can't have a space like the internet without any rules or regulations. Or then it's going to have to... there'll have to be some transposition of the political pattern to the second world. How do you see it?
This question of how law will evolve in the virtual world is a great question, and I think it's very important, as you say, very important. And I must say that it is a great adventure, and I'm not sure how we will solve it, but I think we will solve it together. The people who are using Second Life are from many different countries, and of course, first of all, you're still going to have to live by the laws of your country when you live in the virtual world, because you ultimately, your body, your brain is there in your own country, and you're going to be subject to the laws, say, regarding taxation or behavior that apply to your own country. But there is a fascinating question, as you say, of what the rules will be in a world where we have, 10 neighbors that come from 10 countries in the real world. There will have to be a way to figure that out, and I don't know how it will be worked out.
But as you point out, in the world that you're picturing here, someone can burn down somebody else's house without having to take any responsibility, without being punished, without suffering any consequences.
There is strong responsibility.
And that's exactly our situation. President Bush lives in a virtual world, and he takes actions without taking the responsibility for the consequences.
Unfortunately, his actions are not always virtual.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Well,
I'm talking about responsibility,
Yeah.
and the virtual world is created is a world in which there is no concept such as responsibility. The concept doesn't exist. What kind of a world is that? And what kind of a world is it to introduce our children to?
All right, sir, can you introduce yourself and can you ask your question?
Mein Name ist Adolf Win.
I'm Adolf Willenterich and come from Munich, and the first time I came to the forum was in 1974, and I'm so happy to see so many people here who weren't born then. I'm glad that Davos exists because I've been able to meet wonderful people here, get to know wonderful people here. I think there is no replacement for face-to-face experience and for looking people in the eye, and I'm very happy about that. But without the internet, lots of things would not be possible today. I've earned a lot of money in my working life, and it goes beyond social networks, and it includes drug prevention and schools. And these are things we haven't even talked about today. Internet, Second Life are new things, and there are there's great potential in them. I can tell you, Professor Weizenbaum, 31 years ago, I set up a company, a well-established company now, and I got to know the developer here in Davos. I remember that 30 years ago you already said the same things. I think I've been at a meeting here in Davos where you were already twice. Do you have a question? No question.
No question. All right. All right. Well, then, if you had said it at the beginning. Do you have a question, sir? And who's next? Who would like to ask a question? Sir? Okay. No, just after, if you don't mind.
I'm Paolo Garnica from the International School of Geneva, and I was wondering, as well as a social phenomenon, this is also an economical phenomenon. And also, as well as being an economic stimulus, it's also now very easy to create unemployment through mainly piracy. I would like to know your views on that, Mr. Rosedale.
So piracy, media or software piracy, is certainly a problem that the world is dealing with right now. I can't add much to that because Second Life and virtual worlds in general, LinkedIn as well, these are services which are provided to end users that consume them on the internet. And so in general, services, when you can build a business providing a service on the internet, the piracy issue often goes away because you have to pay to consume the service as a user. I would agree with you, though, that piracy and the ways that we've dealt with piracy is one of the challenges that we've had as internets, as computers have been used. But like this whole conversation goes, I myself would have to say, and I am a software developer. My background is software engineering and physics, my personal background. So as a young man who wrote software for a living, actually, when I was still in my teens, I think that the risks of piracy are outweighed by the benefit, the economic benefit of market expansion associated with these new services, and that we take the good with the bad, but that in this case there is more good.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Neuers ist mein Name.
I'm a tourist here in Davos. I have a question for the theologian. You spoke about lying when one is face to face with our fellow human beings. You believe that media can convey what is ungraspable, the divine? Can one explain what is not to be explained by the new media? No, I don't think that the new media give us better means. It's just a different one. Whether it's better is not something I would maintain. The problem will not change. I was not trying to say that we don't have this lying to one another in cyberspace. Would be stupid to say something like that, too commonplace. We have this in interpersonal relationships. I think one should just become a little more sensitive about this and not say that everything that is real is true and good and genuine and everything that is virtual is dangerous and fake and fiction. And I'm not saying that we can only experience the divine on cyberspace. Nor am I saying that it isn't possible. Cyberspace is just something different. I just don't want things to be put in opposition and to say one is better than the other. But how can you explain what cannot be explained? Well, this is a question which is not part of this panel, I'd say. I'd love to give you a very long lecture on it, but then it would be better to go and drink a beer together afterwards, because this is completely on a different level and it's a different subject altogether.
Da kann ja der Lügner gegenüberstehen, aber den können Sie im Vis-à-vis doch noch überzeugen.
Yes, but if you are vis-à-vis of someone, face-to-face to someone who is lying, then you can always try and convince them that it's not good to lie, for example.
Dankeschön.
And you can always have beers with a panelist after. Sir, can you introduce yourself?
My name is Saravanan. My question is to Mr. Philip Rosedale. You were, in your answer to the lady in the front, you were saying that it's more difficult to meet people in real life. I mean, meet them face to face, look them in the eye and speak. And it's much more easier in the virtual world, maybe in Second Life, where you have an avatar and no one knows who you actually are. So don't you think you are trying to encourage people to take the easier way out? Instead of going out and actually meeting people, you are actually giving them an easier route to stay at home and meet someone, like say the moderator, Mr. Lemieux. He said he met a sexy lady on virtual life and it actually turned out to be a man. So if this goes on like this, then social interaction would become a farce in real life.
In many cases, this is a good question. In many cases, when people meet each other in Second Life, especially for work, they often become friends and then later communicate, either as friends, say, by the telephone, or ultimately meeting and working together in reality. I would say that there are many more cases in which people are able to use the virtual world to make an initial contact. But the depth of the relationship, once that initial contact is made, is fairly normal. It's the same kind of relationship we have. The virtual world is not an anonymous world. This is a difficult thing to explain and something that you really can only understand by trying it out. But because identity in the virtual world, in a virtual world where you can create everything, the tiniest detail of your jewelry or the shape of your face, all of these things are things that you can create. You can create yourself. You can build your own home, put furniture and art in it in the virtual world. Those properties, your identity, belong only to you. They're unique. Your friends in the virtual world come to know you through them. And so in many ways, the virtual world allows us to communicate even more richly than we can in reality. People's homes in the virtual world are incredibly detailed descriptions of their personalities. And so we are not hiding when we're in virtual worlds. We're using them to bring us together initially, and then I think actually in many ways we can go a little bit further. Again, not a replacement for the face-to-face, which we will always, it will always have a unique power for us when we are face-to-face. But what you can do in a virtual world about sort of communicating your intentions and your art and what's inside you is actually quite remarkable. And I think that, again, the good far outweighs the bad.
Philip, let me add one thing, because I think some people will trigger on one use of your word. I think the right way to understand what Philip just said is that he's not saying, oh, it's better than physical communication. It's that there's an expressive palette that can be used to try to express things. It's like, for example, when you can paint and you can paint with many colors. You can express things with that. That doesn't mean that the painting is better than reality or anything like that. It just means that you have an expressive palette to try to communicate. And that palette can actually have unexpected levels of richness to it. And I think that, instead of just triggering on that, well, which one's better, because I think the actual overall thing is all of these things are ways that human beings can express themselves to each other, is that there's different expressive palettes in different media.
As I heard him, what you were saying is that the virtual world that you're talking about gives absolutely unlimited, unrestricted opportunity to everybody to lie to each other.
All right. I'm sorry, I cannot take any more questions because it is now 7:30, and I'd like you to stay here because we have two final closing speeches, and so please, my panel, if you could also remain with us. I would like first to thank our panel, but call the next two speakers to close this open forum, and thank you all for your attention.